Okay, so now we're going to get back into an article that we were actually reading earlier. So this article is called Neanderthal Genes Live On in Our Hair and Skin. So we're going to get into the physical degeneration and characteristics of these Eurasians and how they became themselves. I think it's fascinating that the Neanderthals live on today, so to say, a little bit in us, Pablo says, and not just in the form of anonymous DNA fragments that we pass on to the next generation, but also in the part of our genome that actually influences how we look or how we behave or what diseases we have. Let me read that again for those that missed it. But also in the part, Neanderthal genome passed on more than just in DNA fragments that's anonymous, but also in the part of our genome that actually influences how we look or how we behave or what diseases we have. So a lot of people out there who are laymen or the laity who are not really familiarized with the genetic study and research, a lot of people will say, well, 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA is not a lot. However, what they don't know is that 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA registers at 50 to 70% in the HLA system, the human leukocyte antigen. So that's in the immune system. So that deals with the way they metabolize the environment and food, certain diseases that they're susceptible to, and certain diseases that they have an immune affinity to. Okay, so they are completely different from us in every way, shape, or form. They just don't go out their way to make the distinction as much as people that wants to know how different they are from us. So they'll tell you their differences, but at the same time, they'll say, well, we're all a human race anyways. We're all one and the same, and, we should all mix and, just come together as humanity and slave the planet from us, Neanderthals, because our Neanderthal genetic affinity in our neocortex, we are going to destroy the planet. So we have to come together and blend, and so that we can all become partially Neanderthals. And that's just the Eurasian agenda. The Eurasian agenda ultimately is to amalgamate the whole world under their New Age auspices. And that's what they're trying to do, especially on account to us Black African indigenous people who have no Neanderthal DNA, who has no genetic correlation to them, who has no genetic origin as it relates to them and, what they became and who they are as a people. They're trying to infect and pervert our genome because they know they have perverted origins. And a lot of our people are going along with the agenda, going along to get along, saying we're all one, let's all get over race don't exist. And so the whole race thing, race no longer exists, even though they used racist auspices to enslave you and said you were 3/5 of a man in the Constitution. All right. Now they're trying to tell you, oh, forget about race. Let's all come together. We're one human race now. Let's build all these different technological advancements so that we can save the world through free technology or free energy or whatever have you. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on behind the scene that we don't see. But those with that first third eye, we see clearly what's going on, and they can't fool me. And this is the actual study, and it's called The Divergence of Neanderthal and Modern Human Y Chromosomes. And you could get the information here, all of the stuff I said. We're not making it up. This is the actual source material where you could go to the actual study yourself and see what they did, the statistical methods they used, and so forth and so on. So again, we're going to continue to provide references so our people could go and do their own due diligence. What did Europeans inherit from Neanderthals? All Eurasian people apparently inherited various Neanderthalian genes related to the immune system, HLA types, which we just discussed a little while ago, the human leukocyte antigens, including genes that increase the risk for some autoimmune diseases such as type 2 diabetes and Crohn's disease, 2 metabolic diseases that they're susceptible to. Physical features inherited from Neanderthals by Europeans and Middle Easterners include prominent eyebrows, big eyes, strong jaws, and wide shoulders. 70% of East Asians also inherited mutations in the POU2F3 gene, which is involved in keratin production and may be responsible for straightening hair. So these are certain mutations on the alleles that characterizes their phenotype that we're discussing now. So it says, according to the Canadian anthropologist Peter Frost, the current level of hair color diversity in Europe would have taken 850,000 years to develop, while Homo sapiens have been in Europe no longer than 45,000 years. That's important because upon the out of Africa migration, they encountered these Neanderthals and they admixed with them and even made them extinct. So around 45,000 years ago, which is the beginning of the Upper Paleolithic, they made these Neanderthals extinct through absorption or they just warfare. They don't really know exactly how they made them extinct, but absorption is most likely the case. So it says this is evidence enough that genes for fair hair were inherited from interbreeding with Neanderthals. So we're talking about the physical characteristics of the Eurasians. DNA tests demonstrated that Neanderthals possessed fair skin and at least some subspecies had reddish hair too. Homo sapiens apparently did not inherit the whole light skin, light eyes, and light hair package at once, but through continuous interbreeding with various Neanderthal subspecies in Europe, the Middle East, and Central over tens of thousands of years, it has been confirmed that Mesolithic Europeans have blue eyes, but dark skin and dark hair. Like we discussed about Kostenki 14 in part 1, we discussed how he had dark skin, but then he saw his recessive features. And we're going to show you some comparative pictures so we can get into the visuals of how these people were degenerating as time progressed throughout the Upper Paleolithic. And this is from the same article, just delineating their characteristics further, their physical characteristics and morphology. So, you can just read this for yourself, so we don't have to get into that. So again, we're bringing up the Kostenki 14 bus, and we brought him up in part 1. But again, we're going to be showing a chronology and a timeline through the Upper Paleolithic, how the morphology and phenotypical characteristics of these people degenerated throughout the course of time during the Upper Paleolithic, so that we can get a visual of these particular people and how they deformed and how they degenerated down to the current recessive species that they are today. So, evolution of African phenotype in prehistoric Eurasia. So again, Kostenki 14 dated 36,000 years before present, and you can see his Y DNA was haplogroup C, his mtDNA was haplogroup U, and on the right we have a mulatto individual during, post-slavery America. And you can see right there, family, this particular brother or this particular ancestor and what have you, they started to change in their phenotype. There was a change that occurred throughout this period. So we're looking at another image of Kostenki versus a Vedoid type from South India, a Proto-Cro-Magnon, and we're going to also get into the Cro-Magnon mans because they're also another type of Neanderthal or type of archaic species that became extinct. So we're looking at a Vedoid type, which is what anthropologists calls these particular Eurasian people with dark skin and wavy curly hair from India and the Indian regions like the Dravidians and so forth. They like an Australoid type of people. And so you can see, family, this is what he looked like. Even though they're black and dark skinned, they started to change. They did start off black, but over time they gradually started to degenerate and mutate as a result of the admixture they inherited with the Neanderthals, which further mutated their genes, in addition to the Ice Age glacial maximum that exacerbated that. We're looking at the Pistera Romania, dated circa 42,000 years ago. His Y DNA is haplogroup F and his mtDNA haplogroup is N. And as you can see, family, these particular genetic markers do not match the indigenous haplogroups that we carry to this very day in Africa on the paternal side or on the mitochondrial side. And here we're comparing Pistera to Sungerman of Russia, who's dated 32,000 years ago. They do not know his haplogroup, but as you can see, from 42,000 years ago to 32,000 years ago, there's a disparity between the phenotypes because this particular individual on the left, Pistera who we brought up in part 1, This Khoisan looking brother, he has a more negroid phenotype. You can see the wide nose, you can see the prognathism in the jaw. And on the right, Sunger man, you start to see his nose now starts to get a little bit more narrow, and his lips start to get a little bit more smaller, and his chin starts to become more protruding, like the Neanderthals. And you just gotta laugh at this one, man. I was just surfing the web and I just came across this particular dude, this Russian boxer. He's a former Russian professional boxer. So it says he competed from 1993 to 2009. Nikolai Valuev. And he's the modern Sunger man. And I mean, look at that, family. There is no distinction. I mean, this is his twin. Literally, like this is the modern Sunger man. Look, Sunger man is dated from 32,000 years ago. This dude is still alive today. Look at his hairy chest. Look at his jaw. Look at his nose. Look at his head. I mean, this dude, man, is the straight up reincarnation or something. This is this dude. This is him right here. And it's just really funny, but you know, you can look him up or whatever. You know, this is a Russian guy. Again, we're comparing the morphological changes in the phenotype in the Upper Paleolithic, and this is Sunger man. So we're going to familiarize with these names of these findings and these particular cultures that was in the Upper Paleolithic. Sunger man, sometimes erroneously spelled Sunger, is an Upper Paleolithic archaeological site in Russia and one of the earliest records of modern Homo sapiens in Europe. So we're going to continue to read in the highlight. It is dated by calibrated carbon analysis to be between 32,000 and 28,000 BC. The settlement area was found to have 4 burials. The remains of an older man and 2 adolescent children are particularly well preserved, and the nature of the rich and extensive burial goods suggests they belong to the same class. So we're going to show some of these individuals. Reconstructed busts of 2 well-preserved adolescent Sunger remains dated 28 to 32,000 years ago. And so this is the group of people they found among, the Sunger site, the adolescents. So you're looking at a female and you're looking at a male. And as you can see, the Eurasian features are starting to kick in. You can see the boy, I mean, he's still a Negro. I mean, they still look like black people in a sense. The one on the left, the female, looks a little bit more Caucasoid. But the male, you can still see, he still looks like a brother. But the hair, look at the hair. I mean, the hair is getting straight. And a lot of you might say, so how do they know they look like this? When you're dealing with genes have what you call codons or codes. Because you got to remember, genes contain information. And within each mutation, that means there's either a deletion or insertion of information. So they could read and pick up the information that's left within the genes through the tissue, through the cells. So the information could actually be read through what we call base pairs or nucleotides, guanine, cytosine, thymine, and adenine, right? So we can read these genetic signatures, even though this is from, tens of thousands of years ago. Scientists could use forensic methodology in order to ascertain what these signatures say, and they could read it like a hard drive. Red Lady of Paviland is a young male discovered at Goat's Hole Cave, one of limestone caves between Port Ynad and Rasili on the Gower Peninsula, South Wales. So again, family, mtDNA haplogroup H, dated circa 33,000 years ago. And as you can see, we're following a rough timeline because we want to show the gradual stages of this particular period we call the Upper Paleolithic, going all the way down into the post-glacial period. So this is very important to highlight. And the reason why we're highlighting this and emphasizing this is because people often think and assume that the white Eurasians just manifested out of nowhere. They was always white. They were always pale skinned. It was a gradual process of degeneration. It was not some sudden event where a whole bunch of white people just manifested on the planet. This is an actual process. It's an actual gradual process how they came into being and became a fixed population as they are today. So we're going to continue along with this timeline, and it's very important to pay attention to this. The mammoth ivory female head from Doni Vestonis. So we're looking at a Venus figurine. And a lot of you might have seen these Venus figurines floating around on the internet. You know, it's very popular. They're all over the place. So a lot of you might have seen that. So that the oldest known portrait of a woman, the 4.8 centimeter work, is sculpted from mammoth ivory and was found at Doni Vestonis, Moravia in Czech Republic. It is around 26,000 years old. So again, you see a timeline and you can look at this Venus figurine. You can see the gradual morphological changes. Look at the features, family. The Eurasians did not just always look the way they look today. They do come from people, and they come from black people. And this has been the biggest misconception that's circulated in our communities, because people think that the Eurasians that we see today are just a specific group of people because they're following doctrines, they're following ideologies that has no basis in reality. They come from specific groups, varying groups of different melanated indigenous African people that left Africa, and they amalgamated together and gave rise to these people over time. And this is why you see them today as the way they are today all over Eurasia today. However, needless to say, they did not come from our people. None of them come from our people. Again, none of them come from our people. Our particular stock of African people was not responsible for the West Eurasians or even the East Asians, even though the East Asians are not a part of this particular discussion because they are irrelevant, because they were not problematic to us throughout the course of history and trustory. But our people did not give rise to the Eurasian groups, okay? Our African people, we carry specific genetic markers today. On the paternal side and the maternal side, none of these particular genetic markers are responsible for these groups that amalgamated and became the modern day Eurasians in Palestine, in Arabia, in Turkey, in the Caucasus, in Russia, in Siberia, in South India, in India, West India, West Eurasia, Europe, Northern Europe, etc., etc., etc. Our people was not responsible for these particular groups of people. On the maternal side and the paternal side, we are set apart. And yes, all human beings, when we go all the way back, when we trace ourselves all the way back, we all come from the same phylogenetic tree. So yes, all human beings come from the same phylogenetic tree. However, the people that have the admixed origins with the Neanderthals do not come from our people. These people are out of African migrants, and they have an admixed origin that's totally separated from what we were doing in Africa, which we're going to get into in our future presentation. So here we have Grimaldi man, and he's considered who scientists calls the first Cro-Magnon. So we're going to read from Wikipedia. Grimaldi man was a name given in the early 20th century to an Italian find of two Paleolithic skeletons. When found, the skeletons were the subject of dubious scientific theories on human evolution, partly fueled by biased reconstruction of the skulls by the scientists involved. While the skeletons differ markedly from the contemporary Cro-Magnon finds from other parts of Europe, the Grimaldi find, together with various other finds of modern humans, was classified as Cro-Magnon in the wider sense in the 1960s, though the term European early modern humans is today preferred for this assemblage. Now, this is Grimaldi man, and he's one of the more popular people. A lot of our Afro-centered scholars have debated for him to be the first Negro find of Europe, to show and prove that Europe was inhabited by Negro people first, which of course the scientists know now. But either way, they still try to make it seem like, they were not that, and try to add all types of nuances so that they could spin things. Because a European is always trying to make himself something that he's not. But at any rate, we're going to get into the Cro-Magnon now, because the Cro-Magnon, we brought him up earlier, and a lot of people I know is like, who the hell is the Cro-Magnon man? I never heard of him before. I heard of Neanderthals, but we never heard of Cro-Magnon. The Cro-Magnon is even more interesting to me than the Neanderthals, and we're going to show you why. This source is from Encyclopedia Britannica. It is still hard to say precisely where Cro-Magnons belong in recent human evolution. See, this is where the European gymnastics comes into play. They always like to say, we don't know, but we really do know, and we're going to explain why they really do know. We're going to actually expose who these Cro-Magnons actually are, because they're trying to say that they don't know for sure where they belong in the scheme of things in so-called human evolution, but we're going to show you. But they had a culture that produced a variety of sophisticated tools such as retouch blades and scrapers, nose and scrapers, the chisel-like tool known as burin, and fine bone tools. Cro-Magnon dwellers are most often found in deep caves and in shallow caves formed by rock overhangs. Although primitive huts either lean to against rock walls or those built completely from stones have been found. Continuing on in the same article, like the Neanderthals, the Cro-Magnon people buried their dead. The first example of art by prehistoric peoples are Cro-Magnon. The Cro-Magnons carved and sculpted small engravings, reliefs, and statues, not only of humans but also of animals. Now they said the first prehistoric art of humans are of Cro-Magnons. Well, that's not true, because when we deal with our African origins of the ancient Israelite presentation, we're going to show and prove that these so-called Cro-Magnons had nothing in compared to what our ancestors and ancestresses were doing in Africa. I mean, we were so advanced, and there's actually a reason why we became so advanced. And see, this is what the whole world chooses to omit purposely so that they can nullify African contribution to the world. But we're going to expose all those contributions to the world, and we're going to show you why we've built and developed things that they can't reduplicate to this very day. But at any rate, their human figures generally depict large-breasted, wide-hipped, and often obviously pregnant women, from which it is assumed that these figures had significance in fertility rites. Numerous depictions of animals are found in Cro-Magnon cave paintings throughout France and Spain at sites such as Lascaux, Aziz de Tayac, and Altamira, and some of them are surpassingly beautiful. It is thought that these paintings had some magic or ritual importance to the people. From the high quality of their art, it is clear that Cro-Magnons were not primitive amateurs but had previously experimented with artistic mediums and forms. Decorated tools and weapons show that they appreciated art for aesthetic purposes as well as for religious reasons. Cro-Magnon. So we're going to show now the correlations with the Cro-Magnon and the Neanderthals. The Cro-Magnon shared the European landscape with Neanderthals for some 10,000 years or more. Before the latter disappeared from the fossil record, the nature of their coexistence and extinction of Neanderthals has been debated. Suggestions include peaceful coexistence, competition, interbreeding, assimilation, and genocide. Other modern people like the Kavzeh humans seem to have coexisted with Neanderthals for up to 60,000 years in the Levant. Now, what's very, very important is that now we're seeing that the Neanderthals were actually wiped out by the Cro-Magnons. So the question is now to us is like, so what are the Cro-Magnons? Who are the Cro-Magnons and where they come from? What the scientists will say, they don't really know on the evolutionary chain or in the evolutionary scheme of things, where do they belong? They don't really know definitively where they belong. But in reality, the Cro-Magnons are nothing but the children, the offspring of modern humans and Neanderthals. So they're the babies, they're the children, they're the descendants of that admixed union. So they were very strong, they were very aggressive because they were carrying two different nature in the same body now. They were carrying this archaic type of species, these Neanderthals, and then you carrying these traits of modern humans. Okay, so this is really what the Cro-Magnons were, and this is how they were able to wipe out these Neanderthals. They were more advanced than them because they had the instincts of the anatomically correct modern humans, but at the same time, they had the physique, the warlike characteristic, the survival mechanism of the Neanderthals. Cro-Magnon culture. We're going to read in the highlight. The figurines, cave paintings, ornaments, and the mysterious Venus figurines are hallmark of Cro-Magnon culture, contrasting with the utilitarian culture of the Neanderthals. Like most early modern humans, the Cro-Magnons were primarily big game hunters, killing mammoths, cave bears, horses, and reindeer. They hunted with spears, javelins, and spear throwers. Archery had not yet been invented. They would have been nomadic or semi-nomadic following the annual migration of their prey, and also have eaten plant materials. So once again, we are hearing about the nomads, but this time we're actually finding out why they're so nomadic. Now they're following their prey. As you can see, their nature is starting to develop here because they were operating on survival mode. They had to survive, so they had to be aggressive. They had to instinctively learn how to do certain things in order to survive in the upper Paleolithic, because they were dealing with a different type of atmosphere and environment at that time. So their nature started to develop. That's why they have this mechanism, this ingrained survival mechanism that makes them aggressive and very warlike, because they had to be very aggressive and strong in the upper Paleolithic. Cro-Magnon life, physical attributes. Cro-Magnons were anatomically modern, straight-limbed, and tall compared to the contemporaneous Neanderthals. They are thought to have stood on average of 176 centimeters, 5 foot 9 inches tall. They differ from modern-day humans in having a more robust physique and a slightly larger cranial capacity. The Cro-Magnons had fairly low skulls, wide faces, robust mandibles, blunted chins, narrow noses, and moderate to no prognatism. Okay, so the moderate to no prognatism is attesting to the fact that these people started to become Caucasoid over time. Okay, so they had narrow noses as well. So we're going into the physical attributes of the Cro-Magnon people. The very light skin tone found in modern Northern Europeans is a relatively recent phenomenon and may have appeared in the European line as recently as 6 to 12,000 years ago. So let's highlight that and read that again. The very light skin tone found in modern Northern Europeans is a relatively recent phenomenon and may have appeared in the European line as recently as 6 to 12,000 years ago, indicating that Cro-Magnons had dark skin. So 6 to 12,000 years ago is when the beginning stages and phases of these serious degenerations and mutations started to occur. What's interesting about this whole 12,000 years ago period is this is actually after the post-glacial period. This is actually after all of the deglaciation, when all of the ice melted and the waters came and so forth. So the European lines, or the Eurasians, emerge out of this with recessive features and characteristics. And we're going to get deeper and more extensive into this 12,000, 6,000 year period, because this actually ties into the biblical scheme of things as well.
Before, we have to use visual documentation to bring this back for other brothers and sisters to see it, because they may not never make it back like you. But there were many invasions that came into Africa. When Norma, that we dealt with earlier, we talk about Norma when he reunited Upper and Lower Egypt, first defeating the Scorpion, bringing together the first world government. But it spoke of the Asiatic invasions. Even back during his time, Egypt faced many invasions that came in by way of the Delta. These were the Asiatics that you see right here. Now, as I mentioned before, the Asiatics who came across the Sinai. So here we see the earliest recording of these people who came in and settled with us for a while, till they built in numbers, and then eventually attacking Egypt. This is again from Khnumhotep's tomb from the 12th dynastic period, right during the time of Amenhotep III. Here again, Manethos talks about, now you can see the Hyksos who came into Egypt. And Manethos said, unexpectedly from the region of the east came men of unknown race. Confident of the victory, they marched against our land. By force they took it easy without a single battle. Having overpowered our rulers, they burned our cities without compassion and destroyed the temples. All the people were treated with great cruelty, for they slew some and carried off the wives and children of others into slavery. Doesn't that sound like a familiar account? This period is documented around 1650 or 1750, right around the same time of Abraham. Now, take a good look of the pictures that I showed earlier too. These were the Hyksos that you see right here. These were the invaders, just as you see them carved in stone right here. These are the people who came out of the Sinai. Some say from Mycenae, some say they were Hurrians. These are the Temerians who were indigenous to the Nile Valley, as well as the Tanihisian brothers who were further up in the southern part of Egypt, or Kemet, ancient Ethiopia as some would call it. These were the Tamahu people who invaded from Libya from the west. They attacked Egypt after the 6th dynastic period. Now, it was this brother that we showed again, Ahmose I, who finally expelled them out of our land. Now, I'm showing this in reference with the temple, how our ancestors, you're witnessing, recording these people who came into our land, who invaded until Ahmose I finally expelled them. We want to give you documented evidence to show you that We were at war with these people who invaded our land. We did not have anyone enslaved, but in fact, the Hyksos enslaved us for 200 years. If we deal with the 21st dynasty, 22nd dynasty, 23rd dynasty, these were all Asiatic. Shishak, that Badawi will show us in a little while, he was also of Asiatic origin. So again, indigenous African Kemetic people were not even on the throne then. This is why this is so important to understand this in the Bible, because by looking at the Bible in America and the Western world, they look at this as all being part of Egypt. Not saying that we were enslaved ourselves by these Asiatic people. And the same people who are ruling us today, who are exploiting us out of our minds, are the same people who invaded our land long ago, who came in even during the time of the 12th dynastic period, right after Amenemhet. And we called them the troglodytes who came out of the desert. How can we dispute this documented evidence, documented information? But the only way we're going to get this story right, we're going to have to start writing our own holy text, because if everybody else have had their story and revised the Bible, then why can't we, the original writers of the book, bring it back to its African origin? Now right here on these temples here, now you can see documented where we tied them up, roped them, and forced them out of our land. These are the people that we've always had problems with. The problem is we don't understand a historical war. It's a historical war with these people. And European Ashkenazi European Jews know this. We're the people who don't know it. It's an ancient historical war from the time we've had contact with them. So we're coming back here and hearing the words of our ancestors and those who knew what happened in that day, and that's why they had to turn the story against African people. So you're coming back for an eyewitness account, not for spiritual enslavement, but for spiritual freedom, for the emancipation of our souls, for the resurrection of African people.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
For many years, brothers and sisters returned back with us on the Kemet New Know Thyself educational tour to see an eyewitness account what our ancestors wrote for us on the temples and tombs, which are books in stone, that now end up in many of the biblical stories today. Let's continue with the live lecture. These are the people who enslaved our people. These people set up in an area of Kemet and Lower Kemet called Avaris, took over, and were enslaving the Africans for over 200 years until Second Enre Tao of the 17th dynasty, and it is he who waged war on the battlefield, and his life was lost on the battlefield, and it was his son Thutmose who continued the battle until his son Thutmose, who opened up the 18th dynasty. This is a real person, brothers and sisters, who said never again. He was the liberator, the emancipator, who kicked these Hyksos out of our land. This is the real historical account that we've got to start teaching our people, brothers and sisters. So they took from this African right here his name Thutmose and made a Moses. This is the only account that we expelled a large group of people out of our land, this African right here who opened up the 18th dynasty known as the Golden Age. This is the historical account, brothers and sisters. In fact, let's go into another warrior soldier as we see in his name Men-Kepera, Tahuti Mays. He had 17 battles and won them all. He also wanted to make sure that these Hyksos were not going to come into our land. Here you see Men-Kepera's battle, showing where he's battling the Hyksos. Look at some of them hiding behind trees as cowards right here. This is the story that our ancestors left us in stone, as though they knew that one day we would forget our story. Here's the battle of Men-Kepera, who battled and wanted to make sure these Hyksos were not going to come into our land. In fact, this brother, he made sure that he even educated these people he was conquering into the Kemetic history, okay, initiated them into make sure that they will keep control of people that they're conquering. So that brother was brilliant. In fact, he put a whooping on a city so bad called Megiddo. Do you know this is where the name Armageddon came from, Megiddo right here? That's where the origin of that name came from. But this is the brother, Ursama At Rasab Tepen Rawa Mesumari Amen, a little practice you can say it too. He also had to fight some people called the Hittites. See, we're constantly at war with these people coming from the north, brothers and sisters. We left the reliefs over 3,000 years ago carved in stone. In fact, there's one story right here where Ursama Atra told his generals, he said, cut off the right hand of the enemy. But he noticed that the right hand and the left hand was turning up. He told them to cut off the right hand to make sure that they weren't cowards. So he said, the enemy only has one thing I know they got, and that's the penis, the foreskin. So he told them to cut off the foreskin, and that's what you see right here, the foreskin right here. These are stories and accounts that's carved on these temples, brothers and sisters. Our story is here. Now, What does that have to do with the scriptures? Well, let's go to Samuel, and it talks about David wants to marry the daughter of Saul. So Saul tells him to go and do what? Cut off the foreskin of the Philistines, as it says in Samuel chapter 18, verse 27. Wherefore David arose and went, and he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men, and David brought their foreskins, and they gave them the full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. So here you got it written here in Saul, but long before Saul, our ancestors cut off the foreskin, where Amesu told his generals to cut off the right hand, and he noticed right and left hands were turning up, and he told them to cut off the foreskins, where it ended up in Saul in the Bible. What makes somebody who just put it on some paper versus that which is carved in stone? Spiritual enslavement.
always believed we were alone in this world.
This one will lead our people to a new land.
You have a great destiny.
I'm going after them.
Where do they take them? The mountain of the gods. No one has ever returned. You are the one we were waiting for. You will free our people.
As one! He is not a god!
So now we're reading the genetic history of Europe. This is very key. We gotta highlight this and we gotta get into this history because this is dealing with the actual event we call the glacial maximum. So the last glacial maximum, refugia and recolonization. The last glacial maximum started circa 30,000 years ago at the end of the MIS3, leading to a depopulation of northern Europe. According to the classical model, people took refuge in climatic sanctuaries or refugia as follows: northern Iberia and southwest France, together making up the Franco-Cantabrian refugium, the Balkans, Ukraine, and more generally the northern coast of the Black Sea, Italy. So these are all of the highlighted area that they sought refuge in during the glacial maximum, which we were discussing throughout the presentation. This event decreased the overall genetic diversity in Europe as a result of drift, consistent with an inferred population bottleneck. Now, a population bottleneck is when there's a huge cataclysmic event, or when there's a famine, or when there's some type of catastrophe or some type of event that wipes out a population. Okay, so that's what you call a population bottleneck in science. So they had a population bottleneck. So this ice age, this glacial maximum, wiped out a whole portion, a great portion of these northern Eurasians or these Eurasians. So that's right there showing you something did take place on this planet. A few of these events actually took place because when you're going a little bit farther back, around 70,000 BCE, you're dealing with the Lake Toba catastrophe, and that's for a whole nother presentation. Maybe I should just do a presentation on cataclysms alone that occurred on this planet. So it says, as the glaciers receded from about 16,000 to 13,000 years ago, Europe began to be slowly repopulated by people from refugia, leaving genetic signatures. Some Y haplogroup I clades appear to have diverged from their parental haplogroup sometime during or shortly after the last glacial maximum. Haplogroup I2 is prevalent in Western Balkans as well as the rest of Southeastern and Central Eastern Europe in more moderate frequencies. Its frequency drops rapidly in Central Europe, suggesting that the survivors bearing I2 lineages expanded predominantly through Southeastern and Central Eastern Europe. Senegoglu sees evidence for the existence of an Anatolian refuge, which also harbored haplogroup R1b1b2. Today, R1b dominates the Y chromosome landscape of Western Europe. Stop. R1b1b2. R1b. Now, we have to stop because this haplogroup R is a main and major haplogroup that's responsible for the destruction of Black African civilizations. Black African, North African, Northeast African, South, West, etc. Right? because we got to talk about these haplogroups, and we're gonna show you how widely dispersed these haplogroups actually are, because these are colonizers. These people going around colonizing other people. We're gonna continue to highlight these colonizers throughout this presentation. So, haplogroup R1b dominates the Y chromosomal landscape of Western Europe, which we read, including the British Isles, suggesting that there could have been large population composition changes based on migrations after the LGN. Semino Passanarino and Perekisic placed the origins of haplogroup R1a within the Ukrainian Ice Age refuge. Its current distribution in Eastern Europe and parts of Scandinavia are in part reflective of a repeopling of Europe from the southern Russian Ukrainian steppe after the last glacial maximum. Refugium, population biology. In anthropology, refugia often refers specifically to the last glacial maximum, refugia, where some ancestral human populations may have been forced back to glacial refugia. Archaeological and genetic data suggest that the source populations of Paleolithic humans survived the glacial maximum, the last glacial maximum, in sparsely wooded areas and dispersed through areas of high primary productivity while avoiding dense forest cover. So as you can see, family, these people had survived. So the people who are teaching us out there in the theological field, in the religious bubble, in the religious paradigm, we have to start reconsidering what some of these people are teaching us, because all of these people are alive today because they have survived the last glacial maximum despite the population bottleneck that occurred. They had survived, so that those particular lineages that got wiped out, they have survived, so they repopulated and they came back. So here we're looking at an actual reconstruction of Cro-Magnon man, and this is in the Museum of Paris. There's a source. On the right you can see the Cro-Magnon tools, and on the left you can see the skull that they reconstructed, and on the right you can see this man that they reconstructed. Now, what's very interesting about this man, when you look closely at him and you analyze, he looks very much Native American-like. These Cro-Magnons are a mystery for the scientists, but in reality, they tell everything about the amalgamation of the people that was involved in giving rise to the modern Eurasians today. They are all the same family because they all come from the same source. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into these so-called Native American Mongoloids right now to show you how closely related and connected they are to the actual white man and all their other siblings and family members. So this article is called Upper Paleolithic Siberian Genome Reveals Dual Ancestry of Native Americans. So it says, the origins of the first Americans remain contentious. Although Native Americans seem to be genetically most closely related to East Asians, there is no consensus with regard to each specific Old World population they are closest to. Here we sequence the draft genome of an approximately 24,000-year-old MA1 from Malta in south-central Siberia. We're going to read in the highlight. The MA1 mitochondrial genome belongs to haplogroup U, which has also been found at high frequency among Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic European hunter-gatherers. And Y chromosome of the MA1 is basal to modern-day West Eurasians and the near root of most Native American lineages. We estimate that 14 to 18% of Native American ancestry may originate through gene flow from this ancient population. This is likely to have occurred after the divergence of Native American ancestors from East Asian ancestors, but before the diversification of the Native American populations in the New World. Gene flow from MA1 lineage into Native American ancestors could explain why several crania from the first Americans have been reported as bearing morphological characteristics that do not resemble those of East Asians. Sequencing of another south-central Siberian, Afontova Gora II dating to approximately 17,000 years old, reveals similar autosomal genetic signatures MA1, suggesting that the region was continuously occupied by humans throughout the last glacial maximum. Our findings reveal that Western Eurasian genetic signatures in modern-day Native Americans derived not only from post-Columbian admixture, as commonly thought, but also from a mixed ancestry of the first Americans. which is very, very important because what they're finding out now is that there's an ancient basal branch. There's an ancient basal marker that the modern Eurasians carry, or the modern Western Europeans carry. The modern white man today carry this genetic marker, a paternal marker that is very basal to him coming into existence, that the Native Americans also carry. So we continue. Phylogenetic analysis of the MA1 mtDNA genome places it within the mtDNA haplogroup U. Present-day distribution of haplogroup U encompasses a large area including North Africa, the Middle East, South and Central Asia, Western Siberia, and Europe. We determined the most likely phylogenetic affiliation of the MA1Y chromosome to the basal lineage of haplogroup R. The extent sublineages of haplogroup R show regional spread patterns within Western Eurasia and South Asia, and also extend to the Altai region in southern Siberia. The sister lineage to these extent sublineages of haplogroup R, haplogroup Q, is the most common haplogroup in Native Americans, and it was recently shown that in Eurasia, haplogroup Q lineages closest to Native Americans are found in southern Atlas. Okay, this is very, very important because what we're witnessing now is that not only that these haplogroups don't belong to us and we don't carry these markers to this very day, our particular people, predominantly us that reside in sub-Saharan Africa, we don't carry none of the outside of Africa maternal markers that gave rise to the Eurasians. Neither do we carry none of the outside of Africa paternal markers that gave rise to the Eurasians. So we don't carry the matrilineal markers that gave rise to the Eurasians, and neither do we carry the patrilineal markers that gave rise to the Eurasians. But we're also finding out that these people are so interconnected that they share a lot of genetic markers, which goes to show they were admixing with each other in Eurasia before they dispersed after the post-Ice Age period. You see what I'm saying? This is what was going on in Eurasia. It's so crazy because our people to this very day still have a lot of genetic continuity pertaining to our patrilineal inheritance in Africa. You see what I'm saying? There's continuity in the respective regions that we currently live. There's continuity. We could find the same markers among our people in those respective regions. But there's certain parts of Eurasia where you go to and you find a whole bunch of different markers in one area and in the same area. You really don't find that in Africa like that. Kenwick man, you can see Y DNA is haplogroup Q and mtDNA is haplogroup X, and the date for this is 6,700 to 9,000 years ago. And right there you can see the comparison. He looks very much so-called Native American-like, which is a Mongoloid, of course, a Siberian migrant Asian. You see what I'm saying? These are migrant Asians. These are people who invaded over here. These are the people who crossed the Bering Strait, invaded this hemisphere where the indigenous black people were already. These people waging war on our people. They're not our people. All of these people have a common origin that traces themselves back to the last ice age during the glacial period. Okay, this is where these people come from. They're interrelated to the white man. As you can see, they carry the same haplogroups as the white man. All right, haplogroup Q is actually the sibling clade to haplogroup R. And haplogroup R is a big colonizer. We're going to get into haplogroup R, which even seeped its way into the Americas early because some of these Asian migrants, Siberians, these Central Asians, brought this marker over to the Americas. Late glacial, human genetics. Now, I just want to say for the people that's like, why you keep using Wikipedia? When it comes to scientific data and evidence, Wikipedia is fine because the actual sources are down at the bottom where the references are. So it's not like a historical source, or it's not like a regular trivial thing that we're researching. We're talking about scientific data. Scientific data is well apportioned. It's well appropriated. So we don't have to worry about Wikipedia too much. Not saying that it's not also important to visit those sources as well and make sure that you circumvent all sources so that you can get updated data and proper information. But Wikipedia is not bad when it comes to scientific research because there's an actual consensus with regard to the scientific publications and journals. But let's continue with this haplogroup R. The European distribution of Y chromosome haplogroup R1A has been suggested to have occurred as a result of the receding glacial activity. Alternatively, it has been proposed that males from haplogroup R1A or R1B Y DNA repopulated most of Europe shortly after the last glacial maximum related to population expansions out of the Franco-Cantabrian region. The European distribution of Y chromosome haplogroup I and various associated subclades has also been explained as a result from male post-glacial recolonization of Europe from refuge in the Balkans, Iberia, and the Ukraine Central Russian plain. Males possessing haplogroup U, which Native Americans carry, are postulated as represented a significant portion of the population who crossed Beringia, the Bering Strait, and populated North America for the first time. The distribution of mtDNA haplogroup H has been postulated as represented a major female repopulating of Europe after the last glacial maximum from the Franco-Cantabrian region. mtDNA haplogroups A, B, C, D are interpreted, according to some, as supporting a single previous clavis populating of Americas via a coastal route. So as you can see, family haplogroup Q and R are always implicated in their history. You see, and it has an origin that goes back to the post-glacial period of the last ice age. So you can see these Native American, Siberians, and these Western Europeans are related because they all come from out of the Central Asian, North Indian region. Now we're moving on to haplogroup J. So upper Paleolithic genomes reveal deeper roots of modern Eurasians. So Caucasus hunter-gatherer contributions to subsequent populations. So we're going to read in the highlight. While contemporary Southern Caucasus populations are closest to CHG, which means Caucasus hunter-gatherers, and thus implying a degree of continuity in both regions stretching back to at least 13,000 years to the upper Paleolithic. Continuity in the Caucasus is also supported by the mitochondrial and Y chromosomal haplogroups of the Cotias haplogroup H13C and J2A respectively, and Satasurbilia K3 and J, which are all found at high frequencies in Georgia today. Now we're going to get into haplogroup J because this is another problematic devil on the planet as well, which we could trace back to some of these royal families that are ruling the world today alongside haplogroup R. So these particular two haplogroups are the haplogroups that we're going to highlight for these elite royal families that are still carrying these bloodlines today, amongst others. And now pay attention. If you notice, it's talking about the Caucasus and Georgia. So we know of a narrative in the Bible that talks about the Caucasus and the origin for certain people as well. We call that Mount Ararat or Turkey, which is right there in Armenia and Georgia. This haplogroup J that a lot of Jewish people carry today. We're going to get into this haplogroup J and its implications to show you what's actually going on in this fabrication that we call the biblical narrative. Satsurblia Cave. So we're going to continue to read about this haplogroup J. In 2013, archaeologists found a temporal bone fragment of an ancient human in the cave. Direct AMS dating of the bone yielded an estimated date of 13,300 BP for the age of the bone. Researchers successfully extracted DNA from the petrous part of the temporal bone and managed to recover low-covered genomes. The ancient individual from Satsurblia was male with black hair and brown eyes. However, the individual is one of the earliest found to carry the derived HERC2 allele for blue eyes. The Satsurblia individual also likely had light skin, as he was found to carry the derived SL24A5 allele for light skin. And we're going to talk about this SL24A5 allele as well. The Satsurblia individual was also lactose intolerant and did not carry the derived EDAR allele commonly found in East Asians and Native Americans. The Satsurblia individual belonged to the mtDNA haplogroup K3 and Y-DNA haplogroup J. So again, family, you continue to see these individuals in these areas of West Asia and so forth and so on during the time of, the glacial period, during the post-ice age period around that time frame. These particular people carry foreign haplogroups that our people in sub-Saharan Africa, indigenous Africans, do not carry. All right, so it says about 1 to 2.4 of the percent of the saxocerbally individual DNA was Neanderthal in origin. So it said the saxocerbally individual genetically closest to an individual dating to around 9,700 years before present, found at the Costillas Cloud Rock shelter in Georgia, again the Caucasus. Together they form a genetically distinct cluster that is often referred to as Caucasus hunter-gatherers. The Caucasus hunter-gatherers descended from a population that split off very early, around 45,000 years ago, predating the split that led to differentiated populations that descended separately to the Eurasian man OAC1 and European hunter-gatherers. So let's read that again. The Caucasus hunter-gatherers descended from a population that split off very early, around 45,000 years ago, predating the split that led to the differentiated populations that descended separately to the Eurasian man OAC1 and the European hunter-gatherers. The Eurasian man, we discussed him in part 1. Okay, so the Eurasian man is a particular individual they found in northern Eurasia in Siberia. So this particular haplogroup J people, this hunter-gatherer, Caucasus hunter-gatherers, they split from these people a long time ago. So it says the Caucasus hunter-gatherers managed to survive in isolation through the last ice age as a distinct population. The Caucasus hunter-gatherers managed to survive in isolation through the last ice age as a distinct population. I just find it funny how these particular people allegedly survived through the last ice age as a distinct population in the Caucasus. You know what I'm saying? The very same damn place the ark landed. You know what I'm saying? The same survivors that came off this ark might just be these particular people. Who knows? I'm just saying. DNA and Tradition, the genetic link to the ancient Hebrews. Now, this is a book, Rabbi Yaakov Kleman. The results of the analysis of Kohanim and non-Kohanim markers were identified on the Y chromosome of many Kohanim. One is known as the YAP negative, which denotes the absence of the YAP, Y chromosome allopolymorphism insert sequence. Now, the YAP positive is a particular gene that only our particular people carry. The YAP positive is a gene that defines haplogroup DE, which we know split into E, and D split and was from E, and E became the branches of sub-Saharan Africa. Meanwhile, D became the branches of South Asia. We're talking about in the Andamanese Islands, and eventually migrated further east into Japan and so forth among the Anu people in Japan. And that name Anu is also cognate with our people in sub-Saharan Africa as well, which we're going to talk about in our future presentation. But none of these people carry the YAP positive. It's only that particular Y chromosomal haplogroup that carries this YAP marker. We're going to get into that, what's the reason for that cosmologically, in our future presentation as well. So it says, also examined in this study is also one of the microsatellite repeat marker known as the DYS19 mutation. The YAP negative marker was detected in 98.5% of the Kohanim and in significantly lower percentage of non-Kohanim. All right. So obviously, again, like I said, no haplogroup on the paternal line carries the YAP marker except for haplogroup E. We're just going to deal with haplogroup E because we know it's an indigenous African patrilineal marker. Haplogroup E carry this YAP marker. However, their particular Kohanim gene does not carry it. Likewise, all the other haplogroups outside of haplogroup E does not carry this YAP positive marker. This is interesting because a lot of people like to talk about the Limbas and so forth carrying the Kohanim gene and so forth, not realizing that the Limbas inherited that gene through admixture with these Eurasians, with these nomads, these Bedouins. This is the same people, haplogroup J. We were just talking about them in the Caucasus. And here the Limbas now carrying their DNA. How did this happen when the Limbas are not indigenous to those regions of West Asia or Southern Europe? They inherited through admixture. And so once you perpetually intermix with another people, you dilute the bloodline. So what happened was this Y chromosome mixed with an African woman, and what they kept doing is having sons that kept mixing with African women transgenerationally to ultimate dilution. Now they look just like us. However, that Y chromosome, that so-called fake Jewish gene, Kohanim, Levite, Aaron gene, is now indistinguishable because now it's hiding amongst us, camouflaging amongst us in Africa because it had intergenerationally bred with African women. And this is the case for haplogroup R that's in West African Cameroon and Chad as well. So moving on to page 20. In 1999, Professor Hammer traveled to Israel for the Jewish Genome Conference. There, he confirmed that the findings are consistent that over 80% of all self-identified Kohanim do indeed share a common set of genetic markers. However, the name Kohanim gene is not really precise, for it is really not a gene. It is a combination of natural mutations indicating a common lineage. Of course, duh. The Kohanim genetic signature is a more accurate description. Now, to be scientifically accurate, having the CMH, Kohanim model, is not absolute proof of one's being a Kohen. The mother's side is also significant in determining one's Kohanic status. See chapter 7. These DNA markers are not unique to Kohanim. Many other Jews also carry the Kohanim model, as do many Middle Eastern non-Jews. Rather, it is a marker of ancient Hebrews. It is likely the marker of the Jews and Arabs share patriarch Abraham. Now let's just highlight what is actually going on here on this particular page in this book. Now, this is the double talking gymnastics of these serpents. And this is why I say the Jewish man is the ultimate devil. Simply because he knows us a little bit more than everybody else. Because he's been living amongst us a little bit longer. He's not entirely the same as the Western European and others in Eurasia. But he's talking about now that many other Jews also carry the Kohanim outside of the haplogroup J. So what is he trying to say? What are they trying to say? Other Jews carry the Kohanim outside of haplogroup J, yet at the same time they're saying Jews and Arabs share patriarch Abraham. So this is the actual lineage of the Semites, or Shem. This is their lineage. This is what they're claiming to be Shem's or Sem's lineage. And if you trace this lineage, it is indeed a West Asian lineage. It is a West Asian lineage. It is a bat migrating lineage that mutated during the Iron Age from the older pristine branch of J. You have haplogroup J1 and you have haplogroup J2. The J1, which we're talking about now, is what they call the Kohanim gene. And this is what the majority of these fake Ashkenazi, Levitical, Aaron Jews carry. All right, we know that these people didn't even exist. Where's the body that they're testing this so-called haplogroup they're basing all of this stuff off of? Where's Abraham's body at? You see, so all of this stuff is speculative. However, their oral traditions go all the way back during the time of the Iron Age, when the usurpation took place, when these fake Bedouins, these Jews, started to take over in that region along with their Greco-Roman counterparts. So we're going to read the last page. To join the covenant of Torah, so pay attention to this part. Accepting all its responsibilities may join the Jewish nation. Therefore, being a Jew can never be determined by one's particular genome. Jews are not a race. Anyone can become a Jew, and members of every race, creed, and color in the world have done so. There is no distinguishing racial physical features common to all Jews or common only to Jews, including DNA. However, being a Kohen is determined genealogically, that is to say, genetically. Now let's stop right there, because again, the double talking serpent is at play. This is where he's at his absolute best. Now he's saying that anyone could be a Jew. It doesn't have anything to do with a race, a color, or a creed, or what have you. It's pretty much something that you convert to, which I've been saying and been teaching, that the Jewish tradition is a religion. Yet and still at the same time, they're saying the Kohen is determined genealogically, that is to say, genetically, because this is a secrecy. This has something to do with an oral tradition that goes back to the Iron Age, when those people were splitting up the pie amongst themselves. You see what I'm saying? When the Jews took the Jewish Old Testament paradigm to themselves and pretty much the Romans took Christianity, which later on gave rise to Islam. All right, so the Jews pretty much took a piece of the Abrahamic pie. You know, they got Yahweh. You know, meanwhile the Romans got, you know, Jesus, so-called Yeshua, which is a part of the Jewish tradition as well. And then the same Romans, the very same Arabicized Romans, created Islam. These people are all interconnected because the reality is even the Greeks are Jews as well. They're an amalgam of Jews and people that was living in the Mediterranean. Them people in West Asia, them people in the Mediterranean are indeed related. But as you can see, they're keeping this tradition to themselves because they're saying their particular part of the pie is genetic. It's a genetic signature. Meanwhile, everybody else, you can convert. After all, y'all are the lost tribes of Israel. But us, we're the priest. We're the priesthood. We're the royalty. We're the Judah. You see what I'm saying? Y'all could be the lost tribes of Israel, which is why they're telling everybody now, y'all are Gad. Y'all are this, y'all are that. Not that these people even existed at all. There was never a particular Gad, Judah, Issachar, Dan. These people are historical, fictional characters that has to do with African cosmology, which we're going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt in our future presentation. So I just want to make that clear, even though I'm talking in terms of, you know, this alleged agenda that they have now, trying to look for these lost tribes of Israel all over the place where everybody can now partake in their Torah, you know, because it has something to do with their so-called third temple paradigm, whether they manifest it symbolically, religiously, or, you know, historically, you know, or politically. So this is what we see going on right now. So let's continue to read. The line of Kohanim is a direct paternal line from Aaron, the first high priest. Now, modern genetic research has shown that the line of Kohanim indeed does reach back more than 100 generations, and it is found in the majority of both Ashkenazi and Sephardic Kohanim today. So there you go, family. They're doing the double talking, serpent-like tactics as the damn devil and beast this parasite is, who's still parasiting off of our people now, going to different parts of West Africa, to Ghana, Nigeria, to South Africa and so forth, convincing these people that they're from Palestine during the Iron Age, they descend from some type of Jews. They're not saying that these people are actually Jews inherently. What they're saying is that they actually descend from them. And so therefore they're their lost tribes that they're now looking for, because the Bible is the blueprint to this so-called New World Order. It has always been, since the very day it has been manufactured. There's a exoteric version which they gave the whole world, which they call Judeo-Christianity, and there's an esoteric version which is the New Age paradigm, which are now merging together to implicate African people in the diaspora, especially the ones on the continent who's gullible, naive, and looking for opportunity, looking for leverage economically, and looking for all types of political ways to escape impoverishment and escape their situations that they're currently dealing with in their respective countries. And this is what this whole agenda is about. So we better wake the hell up. This is also why you have these RBG Hebrews claiming that they're for Africa, they're for the people, we're down for Africa, and all this type of stuff, trying to attach our people in Africa to this Jewish fiction. They created these RBG Hebrews as a form of apologetics that has infiltrated the continent, has infiltrated our people's minds, because the RBG Hebrews are here to do what the One West camps could not, which is to convince our people so-called scholastically, which is nothing but Judeo-Christian apologetic scholarship in blackface. So this is what they're doing now, because the One West camps, the rah-rah, ray-ray, the this, the that, a lot of our people was deviating from that. We were falling out of that. We were looking for other answers. We were looking for true sense of knowledge of self. So they created these RBG Hebrews, backing certain scholars to write certain books to convince our people that we're Israelites, funding these people. They're getting fundings to write books and use pseudo-linguistics to convince our people that we have some type of affinity to the biblical narrative and the biblical characters, to reinforce the delusion or the illusion that these particular people are some type of historical character. So what they're doing is actually reinforcing the lies that we once believed in, because our people were naturally going to fall away from that. We were naturally going to wake up into our African consciousness. This is divine. This is an ancestral mandate. So these RBG Hebrews that's coming out here teaching and lecturing, I'm not going to say no names. They're all over the place. They're on Facebook. They're on the House of Consciousness and the conscious community. They're out here trying to teach and tell our people, oh, we're Cushite this and Cushite that, using all types of African terms to conflate us with this Judeo-Christian New Age agenda. There is a Judeo-Christian New Age agenda, and it always was a Judeo-Christian New Age agenda, which is trying to merge our people with this pseudo narrative, trying to merge African people, African spirituality, try to conflate and syncretize our traditions with this falsehood, which is a total violation and disrespect and slap in the face to our ancestors. What these bastards are scared of is the Orishas, is the Alusi, is the Aboson. You see, is the Vodou, is the Loa. They're scared of the gods and goddesses of our foremothers and foremothers. So what they're trying to do is get us to abandon and relinquish them forever, when we should be returning back to our divinities, invoking our ancestors, invoking and evoking the spirits, invoking the gods and goddesses of our people, so that we can liberate the mind, souls, and heart of our people and collectively move in the direction that we're supposed to operate and go in. So this is Upedia.com. So what we're going to do now is go into some famous people's DNA profile to corroborate further what we were just talking about concerning Jewish people and many other different elites that carry some of these Eurasian markers that are running the world today. So that's what we're going to do now, is go into these different elite lineages of the world. Now, famous J1 individuals. Now, this is the same J1 haplogroup that came from the Caucasus Mountains, that came from Georgia in that particular area right there, where the so-called Ark landed. Mount Ararat, migrated to Mesopotamia, then migrated from Mesopotamia, not migrated, but actually invaded Mesopotamia, because this is a barbaric, post-Ice Age, nomadic haplogroup. It's one of the many barbaric post-Ice Age, nomadic, homeless, wandering haplogroups. So this is the J1, which corresponds to the Kohanim gene that this Jewish people carry. They carry a particular mutation that defines that. However, this is the J1 lineage that gave rise to these Jewish devils today. The Hashemites, which a lot of people are familiar with, the so-called royal family of the Hijaz in Mecca. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people now in the Hebrew Israelite doctrine like to call these people Esau and stuff, because there's a new doctrine now saying Arabs are Esau and all this stuff. What these people don't realize is that all of these people's lineage predates the mythical, fictional Esau. Okay? All of their lineages predates Esau, predates all the biblical hermeneutics. So it's just redundant and really circular for people to still be arguing over a doctrine. Well, we have archaeology, we have archeogenetics of the Near East, we have remains, we have finds, we have anthropology, we have DNA. We can actually ascertain who is who now on the planet without speculation for the most part. So these particular people have an older lineage, okay? They have an older lineage, period. And here you have another one, you know, from Iran, so another so-called royal family. I just want to say these people are not elite. These lineages are not elite, but what they are is beastly elite lineages, usurper lineages, invaders, nomads, colonizers, okay? This is who these people are: Bedouins, homeless, tent-dwelling, goat-herding bastards. You see what I'm saying? The very same devils that we're claiming to be our ancestors is the very same devils that's ruling the world today and are calling themselves Jews. They are not us. These same so-called Hyksos, these Asiatics, they are the descendants of the so-called Asiatic black man, which we're going to get into further as we go on with this presentation. Now you see here we have J2, Earl of Ellington, Scottish noble family, Montgomery. Then you have the Rothschilds, all right? So J2, the Rothschilds actually carry, which has a high affinity to the so-called Phoenicians, the so-called Canaanite Phoenicians, this J2 lineage, which is another invader. Okay, you have right there, you have what's this dude named, the Hollywood actor, I forgot. Adam Sandler on the bottom also carried his marker, and you see the rest of them that carry this marker, famous people. There's a whole host of famous people that carry these markers, but we just want to highlight the Hijaz royal family, the Arabs, and the Rothschilds. They are related because they are indeed, quote unquote, Abraham's children. You see, they are the Semites. They have a common ancestor that goes back to the late Bronze Age, Iron Age period. These are part of the Indo-Aryan, quote unquote, Mediterranean, Balkan, Turkic people. They're related to these people in Russia and all of that type of stuff. However, they've been living in the Middle East during the Neolithic for a very long time. We're talking going back to about 8,000 years ago, 6,000, 7,000, 9,000 years ago in the Neolithic period. So these people are not new to the Levant. They're not new to West Asia. They've been in West Asia for a while. However, what you have to understand is that they were not looking the way they're currently looking today after they admixed further with some of the different mutations that gave rise to the white skin, which we're going to deal with as well. You see what I'm saying? So this is what our people have to be careful of. These people were living in these regions post-Ice Age, all right? They were living in these regions, and they are indeed invaders of West Asia. There was originally black African people living there. So the reason why we're pure is because we weren't mixing with these people. The reason why our people is not admixed like these people in North Africa, like the Berber, Tuareg, the people we call Amazi, even some of the Fula groups, what we call Fulani. The reason why we're not as mixed as they are is because we weren't moving around too much, and we were already removed from that region thousands and thousands of years before those people invaded those regions. Okay, so we got the famous R1A individuals. We talked about R1, haplogroup R, R1A, and R1B. So we're going into R1A. You see, this is the Germanic branch. You see a few people. You have the Norse right there. We know the Norse god Thor. Okay, that's where Thor comes from. These particular people are related. A lot of the people in Spain and France carry these markers. This marker is another Indo-Aryan marker that came from out of the Iranian plateau in that area right there. You see what I'm saying? These are all Indo-Aryan Semitic people, family. Semitic meaning mixed, okay? So what you're talking about is a person that's actually a Eurasian that has some type of admixture with black people, namely E1B1B and some of the other black folks that was still around, which had black skin, but they were not African. But these other haplogroups, they did not all carry the same mutations and were not all recessive the same way. But that haplogroup F, that paternal haplogroup F, is the one that gave rise to all of these people. So here we have another Germano-Slavic, Nikola Tesla. We know about him. Many of y'all know about him. If you don't know about him, you can do your research on who that is. Max van Sydow, William Alexander of the Netherlands. You have Ben Netanyahu, the Israeli politician. We all know who the hell this devil is, Ben Netanyahu. And look what he carried. Go figure. Haplogroup R1A. Indo-Aryan. So-called Indo-Aryan. They say Indo-Iranian or whatever. But in reality, all of these markers are related because they're all coming out of Central Asia, Northern India, regions like that, coming down into the Fertile Crescent, taking over those regions post-Ice Age. It was a gradual usurpation and conquering post-Ice Age. It wasn't all at once, but it was gradual, all the way into the Iron Age when their invasions and their control and dominations culminated, okay? They culminated into their modern Abrahamic religion. So they called themselves chosen people, representing this pseudo-monotheistic paradigm. So you can see, family, you can look at that, see these other lineages, these people's names, so you could definitely go to Upedia.com of famous people's haplogroups, and they'll definitely show you all of these lineages. James K. Polk, the 11th president of the United States. You can see him. He carried this haplogroup as well. This is the R1B branch of these people, and this is another, daughter clade to the R1A branch. So they're related, family. Look, George Washington also carried the R1B branch, Italo-Celtic. And these people are not indigenous to Europe necessarily. They are Indo-Aryan invaders. You see, these people come from the Pontic steppe of northern Eurasia. They invaded the southern Europe. They invaded Iraq. They invaded Iran. They eventually became people like the Neo-Assyrians. They became the Neo-Persians. They became the Greeks and your Romans. These are the same people who was eradicated and exterminating black people from those regions, Aryanized those regions, whitewashed those regions, brung their infected genome upon the populations of those regions, which were black, indigenous African people who have migrated to those areas during certain climatic changes in Africa, which we're going to talk about in our future presentation. So you can see Charles Darwin also carried that marker, one of the big beasts, the one who came up with the so-called Darwinian theory of evolution, calling our people primitive, saying we evolved from monkeys and all this type of stuff, when they're the goddamn monkey, they're the goddamn animal that came and infected people with their Neanderthal DNA, with their wicked cells. You got Robert John Downey Jr., him too, he carried the R1B branch, and he played Iron Man, so go figure. The Ice Age, Iron Man, the Iron Age, all of it go hand in hand, family. These people are playing out their mythical characters in their movies, and they're playing out who they really are. You see what I'm saying? Meanwhile, at the same time, twisting it with being some type of savior or a superhero. The SLC24A5 gene. Now, this is very important, guys, so pay attention. We have to highlight this gene because this particular gene mutation plays a huge role in the proliferation of white recessive skin in West Asia. So this is the infection that was going around. This was the virus that was spreading and metastasizing like a cancer cell in the region that infected some of those indigenous black African inhabitants of southern West Eurasia that was already there, the Australoid type that was there, that was exterminated and also forced to migrate. There's actually a small remnant of them still around, but let's read about the SLC4A5 gene. So SLC4A5 is a protein that in humans is encoded by the SLC24A5 gene that has a major influence on natural skin color variation. The SLC24A5 genes derived from threonine or ALA allele, has been shown to be a major factor in the light skin tone of Europeans compared to Africans. And it is believed to represent as much as 25 to 40% of the average skin tone difference between Europeans and West Africans. It has been the subject of recent selection in Europe, and it is fixed in European population. So it's a fixed gene in European populations, but we're going to show you the virulence of this particular gene, how it spread and how it infected all of West Eurasia. All of West Eurasia is infected by this gene, so much so that it seeped into North Africa as well. So look at the areas where you see the blue fractions peak. Global frequency distribution of SLC24A5 gene, ancestral ALA11 allele yellow, and its derived ALA11 allele blue. So you can see the blue fractions is where the infection is at. And look at northern West Eurasia. You can see there it's high. It's culminating in northern West Eurasia. And look at the Middle East. It's culminating in the Middle East and West Asia. In so-called Canaan, North Africa is also culminating there. You see it in southern Arabia, infected over there. You see it in Ethiopia. You see what I'm saying? You see it in the Northeast African regions. And this right here proves that our people couldn't have been in those regions at the time of these invasions. They have that family you see in the northwestern Africa, in North Africa, in southern Arabia, in western Asia, southern Western Asia, in the so-called Levant. You see there's a total infection of that gene. There's no possible way our people could have originated from these areas and not be highly infected by that gene. There's a reason why the people in North Africa are admixed. The reason for that is because they lived in close proximity when the invasions started, when the Eurasians were proliferating as a cancer cell along the coast and seeping their way into the continent. As they came in into the continent, as the Hyksos, as the Greeks, as the Assyrians, as the Persians, as the Romans, as the Babylonians. You see, this is the same family of mixed post-Ice Age descendants. It's the same people, family. These are the enemies of black African people, and as you can see, they've infected a lot of our people on the continent and all around the world in areas that they were actually indigenous to. These foreign invaders, these recessive troglodytes, invaded our lands. Okay, they invaded our lands. They deported our brothers and sisters that was in West Asia in the so-called biblical time, during the time of the Iron Age, who was being deported. Those were African people, family. These were not Habirus or Hebrews. They were indigenous African people who have migrated to that regions and exterminated and eradicated from their indigenous lands. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we were in Northeast Africa. Okay, we were in North Africa. Okay, some of us was in Southern Arabia. All right, but these are the same family of African people with the same bloodline that binds us on the maternal line and the same bloodlines that binds us on the paternal line, that does not have an admixed origin with the recessive admixed children that came from the Neanderthals and later the Cro-Magnons. your regional ancestry reference population. So this is from the Genographic Project, National Geographics. So we're looking at the Yoruban or the Yoruban, West African. So it's just a sample of Yorubas, but it's actually reflecting West African people in general. Now there's a little bit of misinformation saying they speak a Bantu language, but they speak the Niger-Congo branch, which Bantu is a sub-branch of. So as you can see, the Yoruba are 97% Sub-Saharan African, okay? Southern African 3%, but this is typically of West African people in general. So this is an autosomal test so we can have an idea of population genetics all across the world. So they're predominantly Sub-Saharan African 97%, South African only 3%, but overall they're 100% Sub-Saharan African. And this is very typical of the modern day West Africans. So they're 100% African family. So as you can see, we are family. We are one family. The Luya of Kenya, and here we have another population again, which is more so reflecting the Southeast African regions, which we know is predominated by Bantu speaking people. So 89% Sub-Saharan African, Mediterranean 8%. So the 8% Mediterranean is actually reflective of the SLC4A5 gene that we were talking about earlier, the gene mutation for light, white, recessive, pale, beastly skin. And you know, it indirectly seeped its way into Southeast Africa, so that's why you see them carrying a small portion of this foreign admixture from these Eurasians. So that's why our brothers and sisters over there in Southeast Africa have a small minority admixture. I'm saying now you have the Khoisan, which is in South Africa. See, their South African is higher than the Yorubas and Luya from Kenya, and their Sub-Saharan African 47%. But so as you can see, family, we're all related. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Khoisan, they're primarily located in South Africa. They're called the Bushmen. They're the people with the chinky eyes and the very kinky coiled hair with a little bit lighter skin, lighter brown. So these are the Khoisan brothers and sisters in South Africa. And as you can see, again, we're all related. We're one family. African Americans, so as you can see, our people are 73% still Sub-Saharan African. So despite all the intergenerational admixture and the slavery and the raping, you know what I'm saying, as the white man, the oppressor, had his way with our foremothers, we're still 73% for the most part, and this varies throughout the Americas within the black populations of the Americas. So European, we're only 10% European, 4% Southwest Asian, Mediterranean 6%, which is another reference point to Europeans. But as you can see, we're 73% Sub-Saharan African. So, and this is also higher depending on what source that you use as well. It could go from anywhere from 75 to 78. Okay, so we've even seen higher populations to that. So we're still predominantly African people. So all these people trying to say we're a different people, we are for the most part the same people. Madagascar, so we're looking at Madagascar, so you can see the Sub-Saharan African percentages a little bit over half. So it's 57% Southeast Asian. That's 20%, of course, needless to say, because they're in close proximity to Asia. There's a lot of trading going on in that region, a lot of migration, and these are for the most part Bantu types of people, Sub-Saharan African Negro people. In Madagascar, actually, about 1 million of us was taken from this particular region in Southeast Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. So yes, we are also from parts of East Africa as well. So we're looking at now Papua New Guinea, okay, and you can see Oceanic, 91% now, 4% Southeast Asian, Northeast Asian 5%. And so this proves right here that, autosomal DNA exposes who people are, because the population genetics show the source populations that they have the closest genetic affinity to. So all the people out there saying DNA is a hoax, it's fake, how come we're not sharing intermixed ancestry from all these different populations worldwide? What we have to understand is that DNA is not population specific. Contingent upon the database, the wideness and expansion of the database, it's more accurate in terms of actually assessing what people belong to based on their genetic constitution, the population. So this is another oceanic population, and you can see they're all related. Their DNA has an affinity to the Melanesian area, Papua New Guinea area, and Southeast Asia. These people are related. You see what I'm saying? These are the original black Australoid types of people who was eradicated from West Asia and forced to migrate to these particular regions over here. They was in South Asia, and they was in also parts of West Asia as well. They were forced to migrate in these areas. So we're looking at now the Puerto Ricans. Look, 25% sub-Saharan African, and the rest is for the most part Eurasian. So you could see, family, Puerto Ricans are not African people for the most part. Not saying that there's not Afro-Puerto Ricans there in that island, but I'm just saying for the most part overall they're not African. Okay, they are Eurasian descendant Spaniard babies. Mexicans is the same thing. They're even worse, of course. 4% sub-Saharan African alone, and the rest completely Eurasians. Remember, the Mediterranean is also Eurasian. That's also referencing Balkan, Turkic-like population. So the Mediterranean populations are nothing but Caucasoids that migrated down into those areas. Okay, so these people are Eurasians as well as the Puerto Ricans, even though the Puerto Ricans are a little bit more African than them. Kuwait, you see Mediterranean, 57%. You see what I'm saying? Southwest Asian, 27%. And then you have that little 8% sub-Saharan African. So they're even more African than the Mexicans. And there's a reason for that, because some of our people did migrate to those areas, but they got absorbed into the genome of these post-Ice Age Cro-Magnon Neanderthal hybrid invaders and peoples. Okay? They got absorbed into the genome of these people, these Caucasoids. Eastern India, you can see Southwest Asian. Look how high Southwest Asian is, okay? So what we're seeing right here, family, is autosomal DNA predicated on population genetics, showing what populations people belong to worldwide. As you can see, certain groups of people are related, closely related to each other, and they have genetic affinity to each other. So this is what actually qualifies what racial group you belong to, your autosomes, because your haplogroups, your haplogroup is only responsible for more or less 1% of your DNA. Not saying that haplogroup is not important, but your autosomal DNA actually constitutes your entire genetic makeup outside of your sex-conferred chromosomes. So your haplogroups are only dealing with sex-conferred genes. Meanwhile, your autosomes are dealing with everything else and in between. All right, so West India, you can see, look at that. They don't have no sub-Saharan African in them at all, family. We're not related to people in India. We're not related to people in West Asia. You see what I'm saying? If we were related to these people, it would have showed up in the autosomal DNA in the worldwide populations across the globe. So as you can see, family, DNA is not fake. You know what I'm saying? If it was, again, we will be all mixed up. We will be having DNA all over the place. But these populations share DNA. And the reason why I put certain regions together as I was putting this these slides together is to show the continuity of populations in certain areas like this one, Siberian. You can see the populations they're mostly related to Northeast Asian. We're just showing these populations to show who is who on the planet worldwide. So you could go back and do your own due diligence and do your research. This is National Geographics. You can see the Chinese, they're related to the people in Siberia. Okay? They're related to those people, and they're also related to the Native American Mongols, more closely related to them, or more remotely related to them, but they're still related to them nonetheless. Mongolians, the same thing. So these are the same peoples for the most part. The people in India, for the most part, clustered together. The people in West Asia, for the most part clustered together. The people in that area all clustered with populations in the Mediterranean, in modern day Middle East, in Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and all that type of stuff. You see what I'm saying? The so-called biblical holy lands. Again, so as you can see, family, look, Mediterranean and Tunisia, which is North African. Why is North Africans having so much Caucasian DNA? They're only 19% sub-Saharan African because they have infected North Africa. And North Africans have bastardized themselves as well because the paternal line is indigenous to Africa. So they've been mixing for thousands of years with those people in the Mediterranean and West Asia, because they were also going back and forth, sea hopping from the Iberian Peninsula to North Africa and from West Asia back to North Africa. These are the Berber groups and so forth. Some of the Fulani groups as well, that's indigenous to North Africa. They were wandering around because they became nomadic, because they took on that Arab spirit and that Arab lifestyle over thousands and thousands of years. So you can see, family, they're all related. Mediterranean, Southwest Asian, Northern European. You see, so some people is like, so are you trying to say that the people in North Africa is not related to us? That's what I'm saying. They're not. Even though they carry our paternal markers, they're not related to us. Now, there's some of them that's related to us, but that's region specific and that's ethnic group specific, because not all of them are bastardized like that, but a whole host of them are bastardized like that. You see, that's what they're just a mixed population of people that just so happens to still be carrying African paternal haplogroups. But just because you're carrying an African paternal marker or African mitochondrial marker does not make you an African. You see, because there's Europeans carrying some of these markers out there, but does that make them African? No, because it's your autosomal DNA that determines your entire genetic makeup. That's the amalgamation of all of the different groups that makes up who you are. So haplogroups are important as far as trace and population continuity in terms of bloodlines, but it's not the end all and be all. So we use both in making a proper assessment of who our people are worldwide. Okay, so Northern Caucasian, again, you can see these people are all post-Ice Age invaders, and you can see they're all related, family. So please go back and do your own due diligence and do your own research so you can get a better understanding of how these people are related to each other or non-related to each other worldwide, including our people, to see who our people are related to, who we have SDR matches with. Okay, this is how we look at who is who throughout the world. All right, family. So with that said, stay tuned for our future presentation. It's going to be powerful. The African origins of the ancient Israelites, a historiographical, cosmological, genetic, and scientific exegesis of the biblical narrative. The entire biblical narrative will be totally uprooted. Okay, it will be totally dissected and placed back in its original African context and origins. Okay, we're going to expose all of the fabrications and the lies in the Bible by showing and proving all of what is in the Bible is nothing but perverted fragments of ancient Nile Valley African texts and perverted fragments of our ancient cultures that belong to the Nile Valley civilizations. Okay, because all of us derive from Nile Valley civilizations that goes back tens of thousands of years ago. All right, so with that said, peace, Black African love, and Black African power. Know thyself, love yourself.